So you have an idea of the next project that you want to take on. Maybe it's an idea for a short story or a novel that you want to write. Maybe it's an idea for a simple video, a YouTube video that you want to produce or you want to create. Maybe it's an idea for a musical piece. And you're afraid though. You're afraid that it's already been done before. That the idea isn't exactly new and that you've seen it actually in the work of other artists and other creators. And you're just worried, this has been out there before. What if people just call me a clone or a ripoff or basically a copycat? And isn't that one of the biggest fears that we artists face, to be called a copycat? And I want to tell you that, it's all right. You don't have to stress about originality that much. Not to that extent that it gives you anxiety and that you stop creating your art altogether. Because when you really think about it, there is really nothing new under the sun. Everything has been done before, Even your stories. When you think about stories, there's a structure called the hero's journey or the monomyth that Joseph Campbell discovered as he was studying, a ton of ancient myths, ancient stories, ancient fairy tales. They all had a certain structure to them or certain elements to them that were encompassing all throughout history. And the thing about the monomyth is that it's a structure that's used even to this day. So you think about the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we consider the first written piece of literature that we have, on record at least. And it can be likened to a lot of modern fantasy. You think about the tales of King Arthur. Same thing. They're derived from ancient myths. And even modern fantasy now is derived from all these stories from long ago. You think about Hamlet. They say the Lion King is based off of Hamlet. It's just Hamlet that they copied. But then again, you think about the Hunger Games. It's just Battle Royale. Or you think about Inception. It's just a Scrooge McDuck comic that was clearly copied and plagiarized. And the thing is, what these people seem to fail to miss, or seem to miss rather, is that every story has been written already in a previous era, in a previous age. All stories that we know have already had their, or some kind of iteration that they've had in the past. And so, it doesn't really help to stress over originality when, even if you think you have the most original idea, someone will always be able to point out that, oh, you're just emulating or referencing this guy who did it before. And part of that is true. Because when you think about this universe that we live in, Einstein and his famous equation suggested that the universe, matter and energy are just interchangeable, And when you think about what that really means, for me, it suggests that all these ideas that we have that come to us supposedly out of the blue, they're just out there. They're just in the soup of this universe. They're just energy, basically. They're energy floating out there in the airwaves. And it's just that we as humans pick up these energies and then we turn them into art. We turn them into a materialized creation. In fact, this isn't even a new idea. I remember Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk, wherein she talks about the poet Ruth Stone, and how she wrote, or how she had this experience with this one poem, wherein she sort of heard it coming to her, like it was rolling down the hill. She could hear the words coming into her consciousness, and so she was trying to find a piece of paper to write all of these words down, and she was able to catch it before it left. And she pulled it back, and then she wrote everything down, except the poem was backwards. How crazy is that, right? But this isn't an isolated story either. There's this myth or story around Michael Jackson and Prince. In fact, Michael Jackson believed something of the sort that, ideas are just out there, and we're just receptors. We have to hold up our antennas to capture these ideas and turn them into art. So in the story about Michael Jackson, so an idea came to him in a dream or in the middle of the night. So he woke up at 3 a.m. He called his producer and said, "Okay, we have to get to the studio now and record this song." And of course, his producers were like, "But MJ, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. We can just do it in the actual morning when the sun rises, during the day." And Michael was like, "No, no, no. We have to do it now, or else Prince is gonna steal it or take it, or Prince is gonna do it, basically." So Michael Jackson had this idea that ideas were out there and that they aren't exactly our ideas solely. And even with Elizabeth Gilbert, she has a very specific example of this in her book, Big Magic. So in it, she talks about how she was writing this novel, for quite a while now. She was working on this novel. She had basically everything down: the setting, the character, the specific struggles that the character was going through or was going to go through, and more or less a plot. But eventually, she found some other thing to work on, and she decided to abandon this piece. She shelved it, basically. But then, several years later, she met another writer. And this was a person she met for the first time. And, they got to talking, and they got to sharing what they were working on. And this other writer told her the idea for her novel: the setting, the story, the plot, the character. And it sounded exactly like the idea that Elizabeth Gilbert had been building on in the previous years that she abandoned. The same idea. And it was such a shock to her, that this idea that she never told anyone about suddenly found its way to this other writer. And for me, that's just proof that you don't have to worry about originality, because if the idea comes and it comes to you, so either you do it and you create it and you put it out there in the world, or somebody else will. In fact, I have a sort of similar experience with this. For the longest time, I've been obsessed and interested with aliens and the idea that aliens live among us. The ancient aliens thing, or the ancient astronaut theory. And so, when I was reading into old Philippine myths, there was this myth of a star maiden, basically, of a star who came down from the heavens. She landed in a sugarcane farm. The farmer took her in, they got married, they had children. And then there were different variations of this myth across the entire country, throughout the different islands in the Philippines. And so I decided to turn this into basically a story, or to a comic, that me and my brother worked on for quite a while. And lo and behold, the day that we joined a local comic convention and we self-published the comic, so we printed it out, we started selling it in that specific convention. Lo and behold, there was another writer who had taken the grain of the idea, or the sense that that aliens live among us and they're actually all these mythical creatures that are in our stories or in our fairy tales are actually aliens. So it's the same grain of idea, and it's the same. We both came out with that same idea on the same exact day. I wouldn't say that's just coincidence. I mean, it's too big of a coincidence to suggest that. And we never met each other, by the way. We didn't. I never talked to this guy or anything. It's just that ideas, like I said, they're out there, and they're waiting for people who will grab onto them and turn them into art. And so if you're worrying about the originality of your idea and it stops you from creating, chances are that idea will leave you and will just find somebody else. And then you probably argue when they come out with their novel, "Hey, that's my idea. You stole my idea." I mean, I think there have been cases of this in the past. I can't say for sure. But that's the gist of it, When an idea comes, act on it right away. Stop worrying about originality. Just do it. Just take it and go. Run with it. Run with it as fast as you can, as best as you can. And, put it out there before somebody else does, before Prince does, you know. And the thing about originality is that it's not even the most important thing about art. Rather, the most important thing about art, or about stories, is resonance. And I think that resonance is something that you should focus on instead of originality. Why do I say that? Think about Aesop's fables. Think about the boy who cried wolf. How many times have we heard this story? How many iterations of it have we heard in the past or in the present? And I mean, to this day, as old as that story is, it still resonates with a lot of people because of the lesson that it gives out. So resonance is all about impact. How can you make your work impact another person's life? Resonance is basically tied to our experiences as a human. So when you think about how we learn, how we as humans learn, we have this thing called mirror neurons, you know? And this is basically the monkey see, monkey do. That we can learn something or an idea or a concept just by observing. Just like how the monkey sees us use tools to get the banana, get the piece of fruit. It also learns how to use that same tool to get that piece of fruit. There are mirror neurons, basically. And these neurons are also activated when we watch movies, when we read books. That's why we feel like, that's why people say that when they watch a character or when they read a book, they really feel what the character is feeling and they really experience what they're experiencing. And it's like it's transported them into another world entirely. That's resonance. And that's the thing you want to be chasing after. Rather than originality, focus on the craft. How can you make your work more and more resonant each time you work on it? And this idea of resonance goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. Plato argued that drama and poetry were dangerous because they created the feelings of pity and fear, basically, in the populace. And these feelings of pity and fear might encourage a revolution. And Aristotle, on the other hand, argued that, on the contrary, the great thing about drama and poetry is that they produce catharsis, which is basically a release of this pity and fear of emotions, or release of emotions. So catharsis, basically, when you're able to connect to a character, connect to a story, connect to a piece of music or a piece of art, sometimes, what do we say, It touched me so deeply, it helped me heal my wounds, it saved me. This piece of music saved me at a time when I was struggling really hard. Taylor Swift's music saved me, something like that. But anyway, the idea is just that you want to focus on resonance rather than originality. You want to be able to produce catharsis through your art so that the people who view it, they're impacted in a very personal way that they become your true fans. And I have another video that talks about what true fans are and why you should work hard to build them or to gather them all in one place. Okay, so now the question is, how do we build resonance? And for this, I like to go back to one of my favorite books. It's a book by an award-winning filmmaker, Brian McDonald, who also actually taught storytelling over at the folks at Disney and Pixar. So in his book, The Golden Theme, Brian McDonald talks about how our job as storytellers isn't really to boost our egos. Rather, our job is a healing art. We're healers, so to speak, because the work that we do helps people recognize, that they're not alone in their suffering. That somewhere out there, there's also other single mothers who are struggling with how to raise their kids and feed their family. That there's men out there who are dying in wars and in conflicts that they don't really want to be a part of. That there are ordinary people every day who are struggling with the chaos of daily living. That's resonance. And this is what Brian McDonald calls the golden theme. So the golden theme is basically you showing people that We are all the same. We're all going through the same things. We're all human. We all have our struggles. We all have our challenges. And they're not that different from one another. No matter where in the earth, where the globe you were born, it's not that different. There may be differences, but overall, we all struggle with finding love. We all struggle with dealing with conflicts, with family, with friendships. We all have very similar struggles. And the goal, or our goal as artists, as writers, as storytellers, is to let people know that they're not alone in their suffering, and that others have been there before, and that others have overcome their suffering as well. When you think about Ren and his song Hi Ren, he basically tells this internal struggle that almost all artists, or even people who are not artistic or don't consider themselves artistic or creative, have this same inner struggle, inner battle happening within them. And that impact that it's made just because he touches on this universal experience is huge. It went viral. And it's still going viral. All because he chose resonance over originality. I mean, he literally says in his song that his idea is not even original. You know, Eminem did it. Plan B did it. What more can he add to it? Apparently a lot. And that's why, stop chasing after originality. Stop shying away or hiding away just because you think that your idea isn't good enough, isn't original enough. Just put it out there. Work on it, improve it as best you can, and put it out there. One way or another, or some person or other will still be affected or impacted by your work. It doesn't have to be 1 million people. It doesn't have to be 100,000. I mean, even if just one person was changed by your work, I think that's a step closer towards changing this world for the better.